Let's see. Jonathan, Casa Grande, Arizona. I have no idea where that is other than it's in Arizona. You're on with Jamie and Phil. How you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing? Pretty good?
Fantastic.
Yeah. Marvelous.
Yeah. Other than the ones that live here, probably not many people know where this place is.
Right. It's a hidden gem.
It sounds like a beautiful place for a house.
Yes.
A big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of space.
So I had earlier I was thinking of the question, like, why essentially most of us have the same information. How come some of us believe and some of us don't? So I was just curious, like, what your guys' opinions were regarding that.
Well, I would start with doubting the first part of your argument. If we all have the same information, we don't. For example, I have relatives that think Donald Trump is doing a great job. I know that's my opinion, not the show's, not ACA's, but as an example, other people think that horoscopes work or that the earth is flat.
Uh-huh.
We don't all have the same information, but why people are still in religion is an idea that compels me to be involved and to research it and study it, because I cannot answer your question. It boggles my mind that anyone is religious. The idea that there were, like, for example, if I walk outside and I see an anthill and I look down at all the little ants, as long as they're not climbing on my foot, I really have absolutely no concern or care what they're doing. Of course, they're not inside my house. I'm outside. I don't care what they do. Not my problem, not my concern. If a handful of the ants decide to take one of the little ants and slaughter it and put it on an altar and burn it and sacrifice it to me, I could give two shits. It's not going to matter to me. And that's the scale between a human and an ant. The scale between a human and the creator of the universe must be greater. What kind of goodness, what kind of joy or happiness or energy can a deity get if I sacrifice something to it or donate 10% of my income to its mouthpiece on earth? I can't answer your question. I don't understand it myself. So you got me.
Well, I'm sorry I wasted your time.
No, it's great. You gave me a chance to rant. Thank you.
That, and it's a good answer on the show. So I'll thank you as well.
No, I was just...
What I will say is that the belief in religion in various religions isn't strictly related to these things, right? There's no field of science that's examining, what are the natures of God, etc. Before the advent of modern science, only a few hundred years ago, that's all there was. There's human tendencies in thinking that, if I reason my way through this and come to a conclusion, then that conclusion is correct. And there are carrots and sticks psychologically that drive not just our behavior, but also our thinking. And the idea, like, being wrong is something that our mind punishes us for. It feels uncomfortable. It feels bad. It's a thing that we want to avoid, which in general means, we want to know that what we believe is true. However, it also means that we want to know that the things we already believe aren't wrong, which doesn't lead to a natural, tendency to doubt and questions oneself and these things, because those things are uncomfortable. And because it is uncomfortable to address our own beliefs, not just religion, but our political ideology, the conclusion that we drew first, whether or not, you're a fan of the New England Patriots, and so you don't want to hear anything about, scandals and cheating, any of that. These are things that we hold to, not necessarily because of the nature of the thing itself, but because as humans we have bad brains. However, religion takes an extra step and deliberately scares, mentally tortures and indoctrinates people so that they don't question or leave or do anything. It's kind of the modern religion has evolved as a kind of cultural aberration that used to be the structure of society and hasn't died off quite yet.
Let me kind of modify, I guess, my question, make it a little more specific, I guess, to myself anyways.
Yeah.
What is it, if it's hard to put, I guess, into a question. Why am I convinced on apologetics arguments that Christianity is true or more believable than not. When
Sure.
say, I mean, you guys are familiar with the majority, if not all, of Christian apologetics. Why is it convincing to me but not to you?
It was an interesting thing for me when I lived in Arkansas for 2 years. That's a state right below Missouri. I came up with the phrase.
Never heard of those.
Yeah, I heard came up with the phrase that apologetics arguments aren't good; they're good enough. And then the question I'd ask you is, which one of those apologetic arguments convinced you to be a Christian?
So I have called before, and I talked to Eric and Jimmy
Sure.
on that exact question. I became a Christian after I had read The Case for Christ, Lee Strobel's book. And then immediately after that, I started studying Christian apologetics, because at the time I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what apologetics was or anything like that. So the first book after The Case for Christ that I read was Geisler and Turek's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And then Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a New Verdict.
So the first book,
time.
I'm so sorry, but the first book you said was the one that made you become a Christian.
The Case for Christ. That's right.
Okay, and then you learned about apologetics after that. Is that true?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so in answer to my question, which apologetic argument made you a Christian? None, right?
Well, I would describe Case for Christ as a kind of ad hoc apologetics.
Okay, fair enough.
But to be clear, at what point did you, are you a practicing Christian? Do you go to church and all these things?
The church that I would go to is far from me, so currently I don't have a church I'm going to.
Okay. That's interesting. So my first question is, have you read any books presenting the case for the other side?
Yeah, I read pretty evenly, I think. I kind of would go back and forth. The God Delusion, God is Not Great, the case against the Case for Christ. I didn't get to read all of that, but I was able to get the synopsis online.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've read quite a few of Dawkins' books. Sam Harris's Letter to a Christian Nation.
Okay.
So yeah, I've read a little bit of both.
So let me ask you this then: when you read The Case for Christ and these other apologetics books, one, I mean, you are Christian. Do you mean nominally? Do you have a denomination? What is it that you believe about a God?
I guess between the two, I always say, I guess it would be either evangelical or non-denominational.
Okay.
But your other...
You got to
Sorry, go ahead.
being an evangelical from reading The Case for Christ?
Well, I guess I don't really know what evangelical means. When I hear the word evangelical, I think it's like someone who goes out and preaches the gospel,
Okay.
stuff like that.
Okay,
I like that.
that works. Sorry, there's self-identifying evangelicals and an evangelical movement, and that
The philosophical word evangelical.
Yeah, there's that has a lot more to it. That starts with speaking in tongues and goes from there. So,
Yeah, I'm not
do you
on that
have
bandwagon.
points of doctrine that you believe at all about Jesus or God?
There's parts of the Bible that I do think are more probably not true than true.
Okay.
But more often than not, I believe that the Bible is a true source of information.
Okay,
but not exactly in its entirety.
Okay, but what do you believe about God? Right. So you believe in Jesus.
Can you be more specific?
I mean,
I'm not sure I understand your question.
do you believe that John 3:16 is an accurate description of God? For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son to die so that those that believed in him would not die but have eternal life, that sort of thing. I've paraphrased, but that, like Jesus' sacrifice on the cross.
Yeah, I do believe that.
Okay, so that comes with a belief in original sin, presumably.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that apologetics, talking about how high a stack of the evidence for a historical Jesus are, persuaded you that a miracle happened over 2,000 years ago.
So I do believe that happened. I don't know if it was because of how you just put it. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I'm being a little bit aggressive in the way that I'm asking these leading questions, but there's nothing in the case for Christ, as far as I'm aware, that argues for any specific point of Christian doctrine, other than Jesus existed.
That could be. What I remember from the case for Christ is basically it was kind of establishing whether or not Jesus was a historical person to begin with, and then the evidence or what it said happened on the cross and how medically it was accurate, like what would have happened if Jesus was crucified, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the historicity of Jesus was the biggest component of the book.
Yeah. So why did that lead you to believe in something other than the historicity of a Jesus character? Right? Like I haven't done as much research, but I have no problem seeing the claim that there was a wandering Jewish teacher 2,000 years ago that caused what started as a split in Judaism and eventually became its own religion. That, to me, is not really even an extraordinary claim. There's some people, like I think, that argue against the historicity, but accepting that position doesn't get me anywhere close to. Therefore, even before that, thousands of years before that, God, either literally or metaphorically, made Adam and Eve, and because there was a tree that was metaphorically but also literally the source of knowledge, et cetera, a talking snake, original sin, human sacrifice is necessary for God to forgive us for breaking rules that he made in the first place so he could give himself a loophole. All of that appears to be, well, look, this guy existed, and we have this tradition about what he did and what it means. Therefore, give us 10% of your income, drink wine and eat a little bit of bread once every 7 days. All of these supernatural claims are entirely unrelated from the historicity of Jesus or the foundation of the church or the various conflicts over doctrine. I see no good reason to believe that a Yeshua 2,000 years ago died on a cross and was resurrected and was also a God that created the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I don't know what would compel you to believe that specific conclusion.
That's a good question. Just the historicity of Jesus, my believing that he existed, was crucified, none of that does lead to anything supernatural, like prior to that event or whatever,
or since.
Basically, it can only lead me to believe that it happened, and really nothing else from like a logical, rational standpoint. And I agree with that. I think. I went from.
Hold on. As a quick side note, because maybe I'm confused. You said you agree that nothing can lead you to believe in the supernatural from a logical standpoint. Do you believe in the supernatural?
I didn't mean like. Yeah,
well, I mean, from that specific thing. Maybe there's a different reason.
The previous claims about like anything in the Bible say like just because I believe now or at the time that Jesus existed, he was crucified. Knowing that or believing that really tells me nothing about, say, the book of Genesis.
I agree with that, but you've also said in this call. So you've also said in this call that you believe that the Bible is a source of true information or a true source of information. Mostly. What led you to that conclusion?
The claims of the New Testament, especially outside of the New Testament, like that historically talks about those books or the events that allegedly took place in those books. Are pretty well attested outside of the New Testament.
Can you give us an example?
The existence of Pontius Pilate.
Sure.
His brother James. Caiaphas's ossuary box.
Yeah,
I agree.
We're a little fuzzy on the word of one example.
Yeah, and there's a diaspora of the Jewish people, and various other things, right? Jerusalem exists as a city and it fell, these kinds of things. Rome, occupied that territory for a length of time. But the things that make these stories into a religion, right, that would lead someone to say, I am a theist, I believe in a God, would be claims about that God. Do you believe that a God exists?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what are some of the characteristics of this God? Like, did it create the universe? Did it create all existence?
So yeah, generally, I guess I'd say what I believe God to be is, the creator of the universe is definitely one of them. I guess how the Bible describes God is pretty accurately how I believe that God exists.
Why is that?
So I guess the root of why I believe any of this stuff at all is because I'm convinced that what the New Testament writers said about Jesus is true because of his resurrection. If that's true, then I can believe pretty much the rest of the supernatural claims.
Okay, so then
I'm not saying that that's my reasoning.
Yeah, so let's get to there really quickly, because Paul says, if Jesus isn't resurrected, then all of our faith is in vain, right? So Christianity, as based strictly on the Bible and the New Testament, hinges on the resurrection. Do you believe that Jesus Christ, one, was God, the only one, and two, was a human that was murdered and then came back to life?
Yes, I do believe those things.
What led you to that conclusion?
Just being convinced by the historical writings of early antiquity that they're well contested.
So there are a lot of historical claims about supernatural events that are actually some of them more contemporaneously attested, because the New Testament writers were not writing, the next day. Do you believe that evidence, there are historical writings about this supernatural event, is sufficient evidence to accept the truth of that supernatural event?
I could really only answer that question if I knew specifically what the claim was, and then have an understanding of how that claim came to be.
Yeah. So here's that opens an entirely other line of questions about why Christianity. But here's my problem, Jonathan, because you've said that the thing that is persuasive to you is the historical records. And I'm saying, okay, but historical records about a supernatural claim, do you accept that in other supernatural claims? And when I ask that, you say, well, I would need more information. So is there more information about this one supernatural claim that you've not brought up that persuades you that it is the one that has happened, as opposed to ancient rulers of various places of the world ruling for 10,000 years, or miracles in other cultures, or Bacchus creating, fountains of wine, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what question you're asking.
Why would historical evidence be enough to persuade you that something supernatural happened? Or rather, is that enough to persuade you that something supernatural happened?
So the best way I can answer that is the historical record that I've seen for the resurrection was enough to convince me of the resurrection, but I can't say another supernatural event is written down as a claim. Because it's written down in history, would I automatically conclude that it happened?
So that seems to be an inconsistency in the way that you're coming to this conclusion. Because what you've said is that you believe in the claims of Jesus and his resurrection because of the historical evidence. And then you say that historical evidence wouldn't be enough to convince you of another claim. So if there was a historical claim of, for example, Joe Bob, in Pakistan, dying and rising from the dead 3 days later, and there were just the same number of historical writers, would that persuade you that Joe Bob died and was resurrected?
Not on that information alone, no.
Okay, so with just that information about Jesus, are you persuaded that Jesus resurrected?
Just because it was written by like several people?
Yeah. But is that relevant to your conclusion?
I guess it's relevant, but it's not like
It's not sufficient.
only reason why I believe it. Yeah.
Okay, so is it on its own one of the reasons that would persuade you?
Yeah, I guess it's one of them. Yeah.
Okay, but if it's not sufficient in other cases, why would it be sufficient in this one? Basically, I'm getting to the point where this shouldn't be one of the reasons that you believe.
Right. I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a false comparison here, or maybe not a false comparison, maybe a misunderstanding. So,
Okay.
I don't want you to think I came to be a Christian because I found out that people wrote about Jesus and that he was resurrected. That's not why I'm a Christian. When I said historical evidence, I actually meant like all of the historical evidence that I read about. Not just that it was written, therefore it is true.
Okay, but so with an equivalent of, let me just get to what I'm trying to get to with this sort of line of questions, which is if there was historical evidence, right? Claims of this person existing, which you've mentioned, that person existing, Gupta, Chandragupta, these things, right? And there were contemporary writers and historical records that said that Joe Bob died and then came back to life 3 days later in, we'll say, ancient Pakistan. Would that be enough to persuade you that Joe Bob died and came back to life in ancient Pakistan?
No, it wouldn't be enough.
Okay, so should it be enough to convince you that Jesus died and came back to life in the ancient Levant?
No, it shouldn't be, or it wouldn't be enough, not for me.
Okay, so then let's set that aside because we now know that that's not a reason that you should use to support your belief, right, if it's insufficient, right? So for example, if Eric says, I ate a cookie out of the cookie jar, and I have video of him eating cookie out of a cookie jar, and I roll a dice and it comes up 3, and I present these 3 reasons why I believe that Eric ate the last cookie out of the cookie jar, even though I want him to, the first 2, I have video evidence and he told me, should be evaluated as evidence for that claim. I rolled a die and it came up 3, isn't. So if we have one of 3 things that we're using to support a claim and it's insufficient, we should abandon it as a reason to believe that. And if historical evidence isn't sufficient, it should be abandoned as a reason to conclude that Jesus died and was resurrected.
Well, shouldn't we, by that logic, say that historical evidence should be ruled out for any claim at all, supernatural or not?
It depends on the
event.
Scale.
So what I'm getting at is you appear to be saying that historical evidence would not persuade you of a supernatural resurrection other than Jesus. And I'm wondering what good reason there is for that exception.
The confusion was. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
When I say, so when I said historical evidence, I clarified and meant like all of the historical evidence that I've read about. But it sounds like where there's either some confusion is that you're saying, okay, so out of all of that historical evidence that you've read about, take the fact that you've read about it, apply that to a different supernatural claim, and then would you say that you believe it because of that? And then because I say no, it's like you're saying, okay, well then throw out all of the historical evidence that you know about, because of that one thing should not be relevant.
Okay, so
that's where I think maybe I'm not being clear.
All right, so I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make that distinction. It wasn't my intent to say just the fact that it was written about. So, and also, I would never say throw out all of the historical evidence. I wouldn't say throw out the evidence even though it's bad. I would say give it a fair shake, right? My rolling a die can be presented as evidence, in air quotes, for Eric maliciously eating the last cookie in the cookie jar. And you can say, wow, that evidence holds no weight, but it can still be presented, in air quotes, for it. But you know,
Yeah, except I'm kind of curious, like how would rolling a dice have anything to do with evidence for the claim that Eric ate the cookie?
exactly.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't.
That's the point.
So, and in the same way that some other person being persuaded that something supernatural happened wouldn't be sufficient evidence for me, and it would still remain insufficient evidence if it happened thousands of years ago.
And Jonathan, in your case, it wasn't sufficient evidence for a different deity.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I said not that alone, like not
So-
that one thing alone. Somebody wrote
But
about
historical evidence, all of the historical evidence that you're talking about, it was written about every other kind of historical evidence that you have read about for Jesus' resurrection. That evidence applied to Joe Bob of ancient Pakistan. Is that enough to persuade you that Joe Bob died and came back to life 3 days later?
honestly, I don't know.
Well, so
I can't say if it does or not.
So this is one of the things that I think we should talk about, and why apologetics are so tricky and need to be countered the way they are, is because they lead to that. They lead to this is this very specific case, and this is the case that I'm making for it. And even though arguments, many arguments shouldn't be accepted or persuasive, they often are. And usually it's because of the way they are presented. And so I don't think that you've thought about the relative weakness of claims of historical records as far as supernatural events.
You mean like in general as a whole? Or
in general as a whole, yeah. I would find a historical record of a miracle from 10,000 years ago entirely unpersuasive.
Mm-hmm. So, honestly, going back to the question of if all of the historical evidence I know about now for Christianity, if all of that evidence existed and was applied to Joe Bob in Pakistan,
yeah, just for the resurrection, not for Christianity. He died and he came back to life.
I mean, really, I can't, I have to say I don't know, but I also think that it's more probable that I would, because otherwise, why would I believe it for Jesus but not for Joe Bob?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. What I would like to just insert here is we still have time. This isn't the end of the call. I hope that you call back next week, and I hope that question, more than anything we've said up until this point, is one that we think about. It's certainly one that I'm going to think about over the course of the next week. But sorry, what was the next point you wanted to make?
I don't know if it was the point I was trying to make. I'm trying to think of the question that you asked me and think about it and give my honest answer to myself more than anything.
So, I mean, it's a question that possibly you hadn't been asked before, or possibly you hadn't been asked in that way. I really would like you to call back next week, at the very least. If not, get on the Reddit or our Discord, which is phenomenal and a great place to have discussions. But so what I would say is this is going to go live as a full episode and as a clip, and it might help you in contemplating what that answer is, as you've said, even to yourself, to go back and review it with more time and when you don't have the pressure of being on a live show with a host that's going to be a little aggressive with his questions, admittedly. So we can sort of set that aside and go on to another point, if you'd like. And I have others that I think we could start discussions on.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and I will definitely try to call back this week to have that discussion alone. As far as asking aggressive questions, I have you word them as aggressive questions. I don't personally feel like they are. I mean, they're just a question, and honestly, who better to ask me a question like that than someone who doesn't agree with everything I think? So I appreciate these questions.
Yeah,
thank you.
I appreciate that outlook as well. That's the sign of an open mind and a desire to learn and find truth.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, Jonathan.
Well, that makes us even.
Thank you.
Tied. Yeah.
So just before I jump off to the other callers too, so the question that I need to think about this week and hopefully have the time to give you guys a call next week is the historical evidence that am persuaded to believe in the resurrection, if that same evidence existed and was applied to another person at another place and another time, would it compel me? Is that what the question is?
Yeah. Would the evidence for
I will
Jesus
think about that.
apply to Joe Bob? Yeah. You don't have to
will
think of the
definitely
person
think
as
about
being named Joe Bob, because the claim that a person named Joe Bob lived in ancient Pakistan is kind of crazy. But
That's a
it's a bold claim. It's extraordinary.
yeah, it's an extraordinary claim.
Yeah. Yeah. But
All right,
yeah.
Jamie, Phil, thanks a lot for your
Thank
time,
you.
man.
Thank
This was
you.
a good question.
Look forward to
I'm gonna think
talking
about
to
it.
you. Yeah. All right.